guys. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the 3 steps of baking. So you're thinking baking is just baking, which it is, but I'm going to break it down for you so you know exactly what baking is. Got it? Good. Okay, so the very first step to baking anything is mixing it. Now there's so many different ways to mix things, and depending on what kind of baked good you're doing, you're going to use a different process to get to the end result. There's so many of those that I don't think I can break all of those down in this video. But long of the short of it, or the short of the long of it, or long story short, mixing means distributing the ingredients evenly. So if you were making cookies and you needed to cream the sugar and the butter together first, and you only did that for like 2 seconds, and then you threw in the baking soda after you did the flour and you only mixed for like 2 seconds, your cake or your cookies are not going to turn out right. You have to evenly distribute everything. So there's definitely a process of how you want to do it based on which product you're making, which is probably another video for another day. But that's what mixing is. It's evenly distributing everything together in the correct order, and from our previous video, make sure you have weighed all the ingredients properly to get the correct ratio. So while you're mixing your batter, the actual mixer, whether it's your a hand mixer or a KitchenAid mixer, it's actually trapping air and creating air bubbles as you're mixing. So that's another kind of leavener, and of course a leavener means something that creates volume, as in your cake's going to get taller, your cookies are going to be fluffier, leavening like you're levitating. Okay, another thing that happens while you're mixing, if your recipe does call for baking soda or baking powder, a chemical reaction is occurring with these leaveners as soon as they interact with each other. So that's going to create carbon dioxide bubbles, which is another kind of leavener and another kind of gas. There's so much science going on here, it sounds crazy, and like, do you really need to know? I think you do. So let's keep going. Number 2 of what is baking. Baking is baking. So the next step after you've mixed everything properly is putting it in the oven and baking it. Now there's different ways to bake things, but the most conventional way is in the oven. So the first thing that happens when you're baking generally is that your solid fats are going to start to melt. When you think about recipes that you've used in the past, there's some that call for already melted butter. There's things like pie dough and biscuits where you want solid cold butter. These all determine how fluffy your product is going to be, how much it's going to spread, and the longer that it takes for your solid fat to melt, actually the higher or the more volume you're going to have in that product. So as your solid fats start to melt, air and water begins to escape, and that's what creates steam actually, and that's what creates volume. Another thing that happens while you are baking is that the sugar dissolves. So this again is going to depend on what kind of baked good you're making, but a lot of times a lot of the sugar dissolves ahead of time when you're creaming it together during the mixing process. Now if you don't mix it together for long enough and have it dissolved before it gets in the oven and starts to melt, you're going to have a problem. So that means if you were not to cream your butter and sugar long enough during the mixing process, and you put them in the oven and there were still sugar crystals in your cookies, they're going to melt. So if you're envisioning sugar melting, it's going to get liquidy, and that's when your cookies start to spread. They're all liquidy and not what you want. It's because you didn't cream it for long enough. So the sugar was not dissolved in the first place, so the heat is what dissolved it. The final thing that happens during the baking process is that if your recipe has eggs in it, your eggs start to coagulate as well as the protein. But when you think about an egg, just think about, when you're cooking a raw egg to scrambled eggs. It goes from liquid, it's liquefied when you put it in the mixer, and then it starts to bake. It is really what is holding your baked good together. It's giving it body, I guess you could say. So you're not only creating volume and air bubbles and fluffiness, but you need something to hold all of that together. the final step to baking is cooling, which is my least favorite step ever in the whole world. I have a real problem with letting things cool. I always have. I just want to get to it. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes even, I just have this fear. First of all, I have this fear of burnt things. So like when I take cookies out of the oven, whether it's a sugar cookie or a chocolate chip cookie, as soon as it is cool enough to handle, and I mean this is like, I'm talking like 2 minutes later, I take it off of the tray and put it on another tray because I don't want it to continue cooking because I'm just so afraid it's gonna be burnt and dry. I don't know if I suggest that, but that's how I operate. But when it comes to the basics of baking, you definitely want to let your baked goods cool because there's things that are still happening. So the gases are continuing to escape. If you were to just pull it like a cake out and try and cut it and do something with it before it's cool, it'll collapse. It's just not set up yet. The fats are re-solidifying. So this is like, if you make, let's say a biscuit, sometimes you take them out of the oven and you can see the butter is still melting, but once you let it cool, butter's not spewing out of your mouth when you bite into the biscuit. That's because the fats are coming back to room temperature. And finally, the sugars, the starches, the proteins, everything else is solidifying. You have got to let something cool before you handle it, but it's also going to change the texture. Let's say if you were to take a cake straight from the oven and stick it in a what's that thing called? Blast chiller. Have you guys ever used one? Those things are intense. Have you seen them on TV? Yeah, talk about a blast chill. Anyway, that would completely change the structure of your baked good. So what we learned today, number 1, mixing. You need to mix everything evenly. You need to have it measured the right way to begin with, and you need to do it in the right order. So if you have a recipe, you need to follow the order in which they tell you to add the ingredients. A lot of people think, oh, here's all the ingredients. If I just throw them together in the bowl, they're all going to end up in the bowl anyway and come out the same way. They might end up coming out the same way later, but the product is not going to come out the same way. You know what I mean? Number 2, baking is baking is baking. You have to have it at the right temperature. Again, you need to follow what the recipe says because all of these chemical reactions, the temperature at which fats melt, all of these things are very scientific and real, and you need to be on the same level as your recipe man. And then finally, cooling. Maybe I can learn something from this, you guys. I'm going to start letting things cool in a better way. Probably not the cookies, but I'm not going to be such an eager beaver because I need all my gases to continue to escape before I get in there and start working on it. Did you guys enjoy this one? It was kind of weird, but we're just going through the fundamentals. So as soon as we get through all the knowledge, then we're going to get to the fun stuff.